Hello, and thank you for joining me this evening. Sorry for the slight delay in getting started there. Not sure what to say, really. I went to click my button on Stream Deck to send out notifications and things to various places, but it didn't work. So I did it again, and it worked. So it now seems to be working. So let's leave it at that. Okay, so what are we talking about today? Today on the stream, we're going to be talking about this thing called Cake.Recipe. Now, Cake.Recipe, let the baking begin. Absolutely, Matthias. It has been said on a couple of occasions that I tend to work on open source projects that are food related. And there's definitely a theme there. I work on a project called Chocolatey. I work on Cake. Cake has cake recipes. Cake has a bakery. It's all about the food. That has been pointed out on a couple of occasions. So this thing called Cake.Recipe. Just a little bit of history. I've spoken around Cake.Recipe on the stream before, but just to put it in the context of what it is and where it started. So this is Cake.Recipe is part of the Cake Contrib organization on GitHub, and what it essentially is, if we drill down into this folder, into this content folder, then there's a bunch of .cake files, and that's really all it is. Cake.Recipe is a reasonably opinionated set of cake scripts that perform a function in the context of a build. So it will do things along the lines of cleaning up directories, it will do a compilation of the code, it will run unit tests, it will apply things like Coop Finder and inspect code. Those are tools from JetBrains. It'll do things like publish packages, generated packages to MyGet, because MyGet is used for interim builds in between releases. It'll handle pushing to NuGet, it'll handle pushing to Chocolatey, lots of different things. And the reason it came about is because I, as a contributor to Cake, started creating add-ins. So I got to the point where I had 5 or 6 add-ins, and all of those add-ins did the same thing. They did the exact same steps as the build. So the way that it started out is that I had a single build.cake file in each of those repositories. When I wanted to add something, I had to add it into multiple places. Now, from a maintainability point of view, that doesn't scale very well. So what I ended up doing was creating this thing called Cake.Recipe. It's a collection of scripts. Now, the problem that I had with that initially is that there was no mechanism in Cake to get those scripts into a build process, into a reusable build process. So what we added into Cake was the concept of extending the load preprocessor directive. So if we look here, normally when you use a load preprocessor directive, you're loading just a single file. So what we added into Cake was the concept of this load preprocessor directive taking a NuGet package. And what that preprocessor directive would then do would be to extract that NuGet package, find all of the contained scripts within that NuGet package, and then load them into this kind of main entry Cake script, and then execute those tasks. So that became a mechanism to have the same set of scripts used in multiple projects. And the reason that that's become important, so what I'm showing you here is Cake.Twitter. So Cake.Twitter is an add-in as part of the Cake ecosystem. And this is all the code that is required to do all of those things that I spoke about. So it will run the build, it'll run unit tests, it will publish to MyGet, it'll publish to NuGet, it'll send tweet notifications when a new package is ready, it'll send Slack notifications, it'll do all of these things, and it does all of that in just 23 lines of code. Now, and those 23 lines of code are this one, to load all those other scripts into the current build. And then there's this set of build parameters that is kind of the project specific, the thing that you're trying to build. This is where you make those specific settings. So this one, Cake.Twitter, specifies that the main source of the code is in the source folder. It has a title. It specifies a few other things. But if I look at Cake.Gem, which is also using Cake.Recipe, then it's essentially the same script. But this section in the middle is the one thing that changes between each of those. Now, it can become more complicated. So if we go over here and look at something like, if I go back up to the top here, and I look at something like CodeCov, which is a add-in that Kim, Admiring Worm, handles, then he's also using Cake.Recipe, but he does quite a bit of manipulation because Cake.Recipe is intended to be overridable. So if you want to change something within Cake.Recipe, you can do what he's doing here on line 31, which is to completely override the upload CodeCov report task, which does one thing, and replace it with something else because you want to do something in a slightly different way. Or if you wanted to change the execution order of the tasks within Cake.Recipe, you can do that as well. So this is what Kim's doing here by manipulating the directed acyclical graph that is Cake.Recipe. He's manipulating that to have it do other things in a different order. So I like to think that it's fully configurable. It's probably not. There's probably things that it needs to do in a different way. But you'll see here as well that Kim's also changing or using more build parameters than I was in Cake.Twitter or Cake.Gem because he's switching on and off other things as part of the build process. And Kim's also pointing out in the chat room as well, he's in the chat room, is that in this particular one, he's dog fooding. He wants to use the latest version of the CodeCov add-in within Cake.Recipe, so he kind of has to manipulate it. But there's also other good reasons for. So if I go over to something like, if I go over here to chocolatey gooey, I didn't type that right. Let me try and spell the company that I work for properly. There we go. So Chocolatey Gooey also uses Cake.Recipe, and it does similar manipulation, but it's actually because it wants to add in additional steps into the build process. So for example here, Cake.Recipe at the minute doesn't have the concept of signing executables or MSIs, or obfuscating codebase. So those are things that we want to do as part of Chocolatey Gooey. So here we're adding a task called sign executable. Then we have the build MSI. Then we have the sign the MSI. So all of those tasks are additional tasks that we're adding into the directed acyclical graph. And then down at the bottom here, we're extending the order or changing the order to include those as a dependency on that the task that does exist within Cake.Recipe. So again, it's extendable, but the main thing that Cake.Recipe brings to the table, especially when we start talking about things like the Cake Contrib organization, then we have something like over 100 different add-ins now within the Cake Contrib organization. Now, bringing an add-in into the Cake Contrib organization doesn't mean that the add-in needs to use Cake.Recipe, but if it does, it means that that's one less thing to reason about when you're trying to help on a project. If that add-in or those add-ins in particular is already using Cake.Recipe, then you can focus on the code that needs to change rather than the build process, because the build process is the same regardless of whether it's Cake.npm that's being built or whether it's Cake.json that's being built. So a prime example of that just now is that, so Twitfool is in the chat room just now as well, who's also known as, I love it, he's also known as Gitfool on GitHub. So he has been working his way through the top 20 add-ins on NuGet.org. So if we go over here to NuGet.org and we search for Cake, and we have a look at Cake contrib, then NuGet lists out those add-ins in terms of the number of downloads that they have. So Gitfool or Twitfool has been working its way down this first 20, submitting pull requests to those repositories to bump the dependencies from whatever it is to the latest version of Cake, which is 0.33.0. That's a great effort on his part, and obviously we thank him for doing that. But the point I wanted to make is that because Cake.json and the other ones are using Cake.Recipe, then that means that it is easier for someone like me or one of the other Cake team members or one of the other maintainers that is part of Cake contrib to come in and merge those PRs if the kind of core maintainer of the add-in isn't available. So Jonathan Dick here, or Reth, we know that he's mega busy doing other stuff. So I've already stepped in and merged the pull request that Gitfool put into. I've already forgotten which one it was. Which one did I do? It's completely escaped me. I'll go on the list of ones that is here. File helpers, Cake.file helpers. So Gitfool put in a pull request to get Cake.file helpers. I was able to look at the code and then publish the release because I kind of knew already how the Cake.Recipe process worked. I'm going to be looking at the pull request that he's put into Cake.json probably tomorrow. But again, I can reason about the code change as opposed to having to worry about how the actual build is done. So that's kind of where Cake.Recipe came from, and the kind of a little bit of the history of why I created it. What I do want to point out is that it's not something that's solely been worked on by me. If we go over here, there has been a wealth of contributions to Cake.Recipe, which I really appreciate. Some of the people who've contributed to it are in the chat room today, so obviously thank you to them. Both Kim and Pascal are in the chat room, and based on the contribution history, they're the two after myself. They are the next two highest contributors to it. But there's been lots, right? So it's something that's evolved, and unfortunately, it's one of those things that it kind of just worked. So it didn't really get the love that it needed, let's put it that way. If we go back up here and look at Cake.Recipe and we search for it, then you'll see that the last official, and I didn't quite realize it was this long when I looked at it earlier when I was preparing for the stream, but the last official release of Cake.Recipe was back in 2016. Now, there have been numerous changes to Cake.Recipe since 2016, but the way that I've avoided pushing out a new version of to NuGet is by using the latest version that gets built every time a commit happens on the develop branch from myget. So that's why if we go back to this one, or even this one actually, so let's look at the setup.cake file here, then we'll see that this load preprocessor directive is pulling from myget.org, not from NuGet.org, and it's pulling the latest pre-release version. So that means that every time this build runs, it potentially pulls down a new version compared to what the build happened last time. Now, anyone who knows myself and the Cake team, we are strong advocates of always pinning to a specific version of both Cake and the add-ins that you're using, because that is what leads to the most reliable, repeatable, and maintainable build. Now, so by doing this, we're essentially throwing all of that advice out the window, which is not good, right? So ideally, what I would want to do on each of the repositories that uses Cake.Recipe is to pin to a specific version and have that come from the NuGet.org rather than from myget.org. So that's what I want to attempt to get to, as I want to get to a stable release. Okay, so that's kind of what we're here to talk about this evening. So Matthias is pointing out in the chat room that customization makes it possible to use all the goodness, but surgically replace one step. Do that in Cake. Do that in Cake.Kudu client for some custom build step. Good when it doesn't support a new SDK. Yeah. So yeah. Again, it's just when you need to, you can use all of the goodness that is Cake.Recipe. But you can augment that or replace that functionality with the customization that you want as part of your own build. So that's a good point by Matthias. Maurice, no requirement to apologize. Happy that you can make it. So where we want to get to is a stable release of Cake.Recipe. Now, the reason that's becoming more important is because we know that things are going to need to break in Cake.Recipe soon, because some of the upstream add-ins have, or add-ins and tools that are being used by Cake.Recipe have got themselves some breaking changes. So at the minute within Cake.Recipe, we go back over here and have a look at the code base a little bit. Drill down here. Then within Cake.Recipe itself, you will see that all of the add-ins are pinned. So all of the add-ins that are used or made use of by Cake.Recipe, they are pinned. Now, there are breaking changes to some of these add-ins in some of the newer versions, and also in the tools that are used. So if we go down here to the tools.cake, then we will see that again, they're pinned. We're pinned to a specific version, but an example of that would be Git version. So at the minute, Cake.Recipe is pinned to 3.6.5 of Git version, and there's a good reason for that, because we're almost up. There's a pre-release version of version 5 of Git version. We're pinning to this version because in the 4.0 or 4.x release, there were some potentially breaking changes to the configuration file that you might use for Git version. So rather than upgrade that and potentially break people, we want to stop. We want to get to a stable release that has the functionality that's working for everyone just now, and get to either a 0.30 release of Cake.Recipe or bump immediately to a 1.0 release of Cake.Recipe. And then we can start working on a next release of Cake.Recipe that does start to break things. But we can do that in a more manageable way by fixing add-ins, add-in builds in Cake.contrib organization, pin those to the 1.0 release or the 0.3.0 release of Cake.Recipe, knowing that we're not going to break those builds by pushing out changes to Cake.Recipe. The other thing that is probably important, and one of the things that we're going to want to start looking at, is that throughout Cake.Recipe there is this concept of build parameters, and those build parameters are prevalent throughout everything that's done in Cake.Recipe. At the time when we started this was implemented as a static class that's just reused over and over and over again. But in newer releases of Cake, there is the concept of type context that can be passed into tasks and having shared state between tasks. So that's probably something that we want to rip out in terms of the internals of Cake.Recipe and change to using that type context rather than the static classes that are being used to date. I would think that there are already breaking changes. Oh no, absolutely. No. So Kim is pointing out in the chat room that we've already broken people in terms of the changes that have been made to Cake.Recipe. That is absolutely true. That is totally my bad. There's no getting away from that. Between the 0.2.2 release of Cake.Recipe and where we are today, there have been breaking changes. Absolutely. And what I'm trying to suggest is that we should try to get to a stable point, because I mean I've been using Cake.Recipe in its current state for a while now, and it's been working fine for me. There are some kind of things that are not ideal, but from a functionality point of view, I think the core things are now there. So where I would like to get to is cementing where we are today and getting to a stable release version, and then start to break even more things. But before doing those other breaking changes, I'm suggesting that we go through the main projects that we know that are using Cake.Recipe and change them away from using the myget feed and the pre-release versions, and pin them to the stable release that will then be on NuGet.org, and then start breaking more things, because then we know we're not going to continue to break projects that is using it. So that's kind of where I want to get to. So hopefully that makes sense. So I know, like I say, Pascal and Matthias and Kim are in the chat room. That's my thought process. That's where I'm. This is kind of why I wanted to do this stream tonight on this topic, because Kim and I should probably Twitfool. I keep forgetting your first name. I'm going to need to look it up so that I can know what it is. I can't keep calling you Twitfool. Let me find your name here. Where we are. Sean. Perfect. There we go. So Sean has been going through this process of updating those Cake.Addins. So I think we're in a good position to build on top of that work and cement that work by getting to a stable release of Cake.Recipe, so that as we continue to update those Cake add-ins, we can get them to a good working point in terms of a build process, to then be allowed to I've just seen Maurice's message in the chat. Yes, probably. It's so hard. So there's this mental mind process going on between the Twitter handles and the GitHub handles that are in the chat room to the person's actual name. It's not just immediately obvious who people are, which is unfortunate, but it's the social media world that we live in, I guess, nowadays. I remember one of the first conferences that I went to is you got a name badge, and they had you had obviously your actual name on the name badge, but then underneath they had your Twitter handle, because it was an obvious thing to do, because a lot of people know people by their Twitter handles as opposed to their actual names, which I thought was a nice touch. Okay, so like I say, those of you who are in the chat room making use of Cake.Recipe, that's my thought process in terms of what I'm trying to achieve. So I've basically been delaying this and delaying this and delaying this and procrastinating and going off and doing other things and yada, yada, yada. I would like to get to a point where we have that stable release. Matthias is now saying, recipe integration tests were broken for a while, but that's fixed now, right? No, and we're going to come back to that. Yeah, we'll come back to that one. Adding more projects to the integration test would let us spot breaking changes quicker in the future. Yes, so what Matthias is speaking about there is, if we go up to the top level here, and we look at the test.cake, then as part of the integration tests that are run as part of the Cake.Recipe build, is we actually use some of those open source projects to build Cake.Recipe and generate something, a nupkeg, and then take that nupkeg and run the build against some of these projects. So in theory, if the build worked before and we take a new version of Cake.Recipe and we stick it in and it fails, then we're going to know that something broke. So what Matthias is speaking about there is it's not that bad, Kim, is it? Surely. So what Matthias is suggesting is we can extend that to include more add-ins to kind of widen the source pool for potential issues. So no, one of the issues. So let's maybe just jump onto that next. So we can close this off. We can close that one. Those are the examples. And we get to here. Right. So if we look at the issues, then there are 46 open issues on Cake.Recipe. But there is a milestone, and the idea is that we're going to 130. Oh my goodness! So there are 130 closed issues in this milestone, and there are currently 10 open. Right. So where I would like to get to is that there are no open issues, and what I'm hoping to get from the chat room this evening, as we go through these issues, if there are any issues that are not, or rather, if there are high priority issues in your minds in terms of using Cake.Recipe that are not in this list, we need to get them in this list, and we're going to close them all out. We're not going to do that tonight, but we're going to start that process. Should be a fun release note when everything is done. It should be, assuming Git Release Manager can handle that many, which I'm sure it can. Right. So what I'm going to start with is I'm going to go through this list, and I'm going to start to drop some of them out of the release because we're not going to do it. It's as simple as that. Right. But what I would like to ensure is that for those of you who are actively using Cake.Recipe, let's make sure that any high priority bugbears or known issues are included in this list, and if they're not, we need to get them added to the milestone. Okay. Essentially, yes, Maurice. Just moving to the next release. That's essentially what we're going to do. So one of the prime candidates right now is add documentation about what Cake.Recipe is and is not. We're not going to do that as part of that release because that's no small task, and that's not something that is going to get done anytime soon. There is some documentation for Cake.Recipe. So if we jump over here, then there is a YAM build, and there is some documentation about what it is and how it's done. So that's something that we can grow. I don't think we need to do that as part of the part of this release. We can grow that, right? So I'm going to drop this out of this milestone. So I'm going to take that one out. If anybody objects to any of the changes that I'm making, feel free to jump in. But I'm deciding that I'm going to take that one out, right? So let's go back in here. So we're down to 9. Yay! Now one of the other ones that I put in here was to allow Cake.Recipe to do the installation of the .NET SDK as part of the build. Now, Maurice is saying, I've done one project with Cake.Recipe and the documentation was enough for me. That's a good start. That means it's perfect, right? We don't need to do any more documentation. So this issue was about the concept of if you were doing a .NET Core build, you would most likely want or need a specific version of the SDK installed to perform that build. Now, I had the idea to make that part of Cake.Recipe. Kind of what's happened organically through Cake.Recipe, or rather, what's happened organically through other projects is that that's actually done as part of the bootstrapper. Now, I'm going to say that I'm going to bump this one out of the milestone as well. And if anybody wants this, we could, let's do this actually. Let's jump over here and have a look at github.com for C#Fritz. C#Fritz's core wiki. And in his build.sh file here, thanks to some contributions from Matthias, there is a sample here which is to install the .NET SDK and CLI and various other things. So we can point people at this one. Let's grab this shortcut link, and let's go back to this one and say, for now, this can be done in bootstrappers. See here, for an example, and the other one is build.sh. Well, okay, but I'm already here in the media wiki or the core wiki repository, so I'm going to use that one. Matthias is pointing out that what I'm linking to here is also in the bootstrapper that's used for the Cake build itself, but I'm already here, so I'm going to use this one. So I'm going to comment that, and I'm going to drop this out the milestone as well. So let's remove that one. Okay. So far, so good. We're down from 10 to 8. Matthias is also saying 0.30 now added globber pattern support to the load directive, which could potentially simplify testing. Could remove recipe load from NuGet and insert a globber one. So funny story. Cake.Recipe in its current form doesn't work with Cake 0.33.0. It will only work with 0.32.1. The reason for that is because of reasons. The current version of Cake.Recipe doesn't like the changes that were done for manipulating the different namespace imports and things that were done as part of 0.33. So we're not going to be able to update that just yet, and that's why there's this issue, which is support Cake 33. We're just not. It doesn't work at the minute. Various things in Cake.Incubator and so on. That isn't going to happen. So that's why I want to get the stable release out so we can start breaking things going forward. Okay, so back to here. An alternative edition is also available in Cake.Transvex without the need to specify a specific. Interesting. Okay. That's so. Kim's mentioning there that there's an alternative bootstrapper that does things in a different way. That's definitely still on us as the Cake team to rationalize how all of these different ways of doing things are working and kind of provide a recommended way of doing things. At the minute, we have a recommended way of doing bootstrappers for using NuGet.exe, doing things the old style way, but there's definitely ways and means of doing things differently. So that's on us. We still need to figure that out. So this issue is one that was added recently, so that one does need to happen. Fix issue with. So this is the current integration test issue that I'm aware of, Matthias. So going back to the point that you were making. So currently, the integration tests, the way that they're written, they don't actually use the newly created Cake.Recipe because the in-process NuGet client that's used to install the load preprocessor directive actually uses this nomenclature, so it adds the version number onto the end, which as a result means that the Cake.Recipe one that's actually extracted as part of the integration test isn't actually used because it uses the ones from this one as opposed to the one that's just been extracted. So I asked Martin about this a while ago, and his suggestion was to do something similar to what's done in Bakery to extract that. So this is what I'm aware of in terms of the integration tests not working correctly. So that definitely needs to be fixed, I think, before we can get out a stable release. MS test, unit test fail. This is raised by Jamie. Putting here to track it, just assign it to me. Error, VS test, could not locate executable. There's lots of good error message in there. Oh, hold on. Is that one fixed? Let's have a look. We have a merged pull request associated with it. Just the start. Fixes MS test issues. Pulled away from the project. It would move it past that one issue. Okay, fine. I'm gonna go ahead and close that issue. I think that needs to be. I'm gonna close this one. Beautiful. I think that's that part of the issue is done. Matthias is now saying that's why I think we should remove recipe load. Are you on your phone, Matthias? Replace with globber one, or generate a common file that can for loaded. I'm struggling with that one, mate. Let's come back to it. Document publishing issue. I think this one was Pascal's issue. Has he just dropped off? He has, or I don't know if he's still in the chat room or not. Which one was this one? Document publishing issue when there are no changes to commit. We found out that libgit sharp intercurrently has issues with returning. Mod files. This one could. This seems to be a bit. Could you check? I think introduce it because of a potential bug in the underlying. I closed this in 2017, and then I reopened it, but I don't really know why. I'm not aware of this still being an issue. Is anyone in the chat room who's currently using Cake.Recipe and also generating documentation from it, are they aware of any issues regarding the publication of documentation? Because I'm not. It's always just worked for me. So unless there's a shout to say that this is still an issue, I'm tempted to say I'm gonna close this off as well. But Kim's saying generating a common file would probably be best. Can't use the globber until Cake.Recipe supports 33.0. Agreed. Can't do that, and that's not the intention of this release. So if we can do something without the need to bump to 0.33, I'm all ears, but I'm hesitant to take on board that work because one of the main things I'm wanting to do is it's a whole chicken and egg thing. If we wait until everything's got 0.33 in it, then we've missed an opportunity to pin all of those add-ins to a specific version of Cake.Recipe before we break things. So I'm hesitant to take on board that work until we know that we can break things. I haven't seen an issue with this lately, and as such I am going to call this fixed for now. If there are still issues, we can investigate later. So I'm going to close that one. Okay, so where do we get to? So 0.30. Should be able to not include source files for YAM. Right now, Cake.Recipe assumes that source files for API generations are always included, but this might not actually be required. For example, in the case of Chocolate GUI, it should be possible to override the default. I think that makes sense in my head. So that sounds like a build parameter to add in. I also don't think it needs to be in. Yeah, I'm going to call that. I'm going to take that one out. Milestones 5. This one I think I want to have. This is one that I opened again. So right now, if we were to look at an environment variables for something, so let's go to a CI build for let's not use one of those, let's use one of these, and we look at, say, these new ones. and we look at the environments tab, which should all have all the secrets hidden, he says. Let's just click on it anyway. So, what was that issue? Hold on. Add environment variable for my get feed URL. Oh, environment variable. Oh, no, I see what I'm saying. Of course, that's no longer going to the same URL, same location. Add environment variable for my get feed URL. The one that we currently have is the push URL. So right now, what this is saying is that this source here is where a package is pushed to. But I think what this issue was referring to was that back in 2017, for that line, it was sourcing packages from a myget feed, which is not necessarily the same location as where you're pushing to. So let's have a look in here. We're not doing that anymore. Let's go back in history a little bit through here. Back to, when was this created? This was created in March 2017. Let's just see what it was doing. August. Older. Onto the second page. March. Let's go back to the start of March, which is this one. Let's have a look. And this was build.cake on 105. Build.cake. What was it doing? Oh, look at that. During the restore, this thing was looking at here. Yeah, I agree. That's changed. Absolutely it is. Yeah, I don't think this one's important anymore. This is no longer being done in the same way, so I no longer think that this is required. So let's strip that label off. Let's remove it from the milestone. Sounds good to me. You know what we're going to get to? We're going to be able to do a release tonight. I'm just not going to do any of the open issues. No, that's not what we're going to do. So we need to fix this integration tests. We need to change the wording. Allow configuration of which build output files to copy to publish folders. What was I talking about here? Right now, all files from build output are copied to publish folder. This should be made configurable. Right now, all files from build output folder are copied to the publish folder. This should be made configurable. I know what it's talking about, but I also don't even know how I would do that, or how we would do that. You would need to provide some sort of glob pattern for all the files that you wanted to copy, and that would be done on a per project basis. So, has anyone run into any issues where they didn't want to copy anything from the build bin folder into what is the publish folder in Cake.Recipe? I'm going to assume that comment from Matthias is about something else, because it was too long to the answer to my current question, and let me finish this current thought process. I'm not aware of where I would need this today in Cake.Recipe. So a quick show of hands. Kim's saying, I would think copy only application perhaps, or only libraries. I think that's maybe where it came from. But I mean, there's ways and means of doing that without the need to control it. I mean, if you're taking that exe or that assembly into a NuGet package or a chocolate package, then you can control that through the new spec file. So what I'm getting at is I don't know if there's an immediate need to have this, and I'm tempted to say we're gonna turf it. And given that it's my issue, I'm gonna say I don't need this right now, and no one else has commented on it. So on that basis, it's gone. Right? So Matthias' comment. Issue is Cake Incubator only use one namespace for all aliases extensions, and 033 introduce an alias with same name that's in Incubator. In those scenarios, Cake CodeGen skips importing namespaces for CodeGen conflicting aliases. Cake.Incubator started splitting into separate namespaces, so exclusion would only affect conflicts, which sorted some issues. But issue was Incubator also had non-Cake aliases that were imported for free that weren't moved to their own namespace. I totally agree with all of that, Matthias, but that doesn't change anything about what I said regarding not wanting to support Cake 33 at the minute, because bringing up to Cake 33 also means that we need to update to the latest version of Git version, because in 33 we introduced a verbosity flag into Cake 33 that isn't respected by 365, which means we need to jump to Cake version 4, which means we break a bunch of people. So again, there's a little cyclical thing going on there. So I'm not willing to go down that route without having a stable release. Got to go. No worries, Matthias. Yeah, I get what you're saying about Incubator, but no, just no. So I'm going to do this one, and we need to fix this one. Error in Coop Finder, project new spec, root directory doesn't exist. There still seems to be an issue with the latest Cake.Recipe regarding Coop Finder. I assume this is related to the update of JetBrains tool in a recent version, and probably should affect other add-ins since Cake.Recipe is cached. So this is... I haven't seen this recently, I'll be honest. I know that we are not on 2017 version of Coop Finder anymore. Can be reproduced here. So which one was this on? So this project was Cake.Prca. Cake.Prca isn't built anymore. We use Cake.Issues instead. So this one was linking to where was this listening to? Build 050 beta 050. So at least on a couple of builds after that, it was working. So unless Pascal turned it off, things started working. So was this the one that failed? That was a beta 2. Which one was it? It was beta 1+1. It's maybe not even here. Oh, it must be because we clicked on it. I'm going to call it good, because there are lots of green builds after that. So unless he turned off Coop Finder, which is possible, I'm going to say, and he's not here to defend it anymore, so I'm going to say, I remember seeing this issue at the time, but haven't seen it again recently, and JetBrains tools have undergone major releases since this issue was opened. Closing for now. Feel free to reopen. So I'm going to take that off of here and I'm going to close it. And let's go back. So I think that leaves us 2 issues in the 0.30 release of Cake.Recipe. Now, the more I think about it, and the more I think about what we're going to do in the next release, the more I think this has to be this. So I'm going to say that the next release of Cake.Recipe is 1.0.0. Okay? Any objections to that from anyone? So we need to fix this one, and we need to fix the integration tests. So again, anybody who's currently using Cake.Recipe, are there any major or high priority items that you're aware of that we should include before we get this release out the door? I'm going to leave that question open, and I'm going to go and start looking at changing the wording on the messaging, because this is a simple fix. So I'm assuming that's good, Maurice. Okay, so in here there should be something along the lines of Twitter message. Yeah. So the reason that this issue was raised is because the Gitter messages and the Twitter messages that we send out when a new add-in has been released is actually a lie. And what I mean by that is, if we go over here to Cake.Contrib and we take a look at this one. So this was a tweet that was automatically sent out by Cake.Recipe for the Cake.npm add-in to say that version 0.17.0 of Cake.Recipe has just been released. And then it links to NuGet, which is here. Now, at the time when that tweet was sent out, that 0.17.0 didn't actually exist, because it was going through the package indexing that NuGet does. So that link is a lie. It doesn't actually exist. So the suggestion was that the wording on this needs to change to say something along the lines of indicate that NuGet packages are almost ready. So the current wording is version 0.17.0 of Cake.Recipe add-in has just been released. And I think I'm going to add in here, this will be available shortly. This should be available shortly at NuGet. Right? Now, if I go back to here, we can see that it do exist if the URL is used with version. I don't even think it does, though, Kim. I don't think it'll. If you are a member of if you are signed in as Cake.Contrib, or the person who has access to it, then yes. But otherwise, you'll get a 404. Because I checked it. I checked it when I did the release of Cake.Twitter. It was a 404. The immediate one was a 404. How can I prove that to you? Why not wait for the index? That's a very good question, Sean. How would we do that? Because as part of the build process, so let me bring this up. So as part of Cake.Recipe, if I go to our build.cake file, build.cake, then we have a setup and then we have a teardown. So in here, we say that if the build was successful and it's a tagged build, then we should send a message to Twitter because it was a successful build, so we know that we've pushed things. But then the build finishes. So what you're suggesting, I think, is that this build should halt until we know that it's been released, but that's potentially going to be an indeterminate period of time. So this build could be sitting waiting for half an hour, depending on the backlog that NuGet has. So I think we can actually look at that, can't we? If we look at status, we can see the packaging, can't we? We can see how long it's currently taking to index statistics. I thought we could. It's normally really quick, but there are times when it takes ages to have a package index. I've sat and wait for over an hour sometimes. So although I like the suggestion, I don't think it's something that the actual. I don't think it's something we should have the build do. If anything, what we've spoken about is removing these messages from Cake.Recipe and having some other process running that waits, and then once it's known to be available, then send a tweet or send a Gitter message. But for now, I think the lesser of the two evils would be to make it clear in the messages that it might not quite be available yet. So, has just been released. I'm going to say here, has just been released. This will be available here. Available here. Blah, blah, blah. Once package indexing is complete, is what I'm going to do there. So that's the Twitter message, and there's probably going to be a similar one for Microsoft Teams, which I'm not actually using, but it's possible that some people is, will be available here. I should probably just copy and paste. Once package indexing is complete. Copy it this time, because there's one more to do. Copy, which is the Gitter message, which is slightly different. Released will be available here. This is why I don't copy paste things, because the synergy doesn't always work very well. This one. Copy. Okay. So those are the new default messages. Agreed. So that sounds better. The tweet looks wonky with the previous version. Yes, it does. Really, Pascal? Really? I don't believe you. Really? New spec root directory doesn't exist. Checked path. Can you reproduce it locally, Pascal? Or does it only happen on AppVeyor? okay, so let me put it this way. I haven't seen this issue, so I'm not actively going to be fixing this before the final release of, or the next release of Cake.Recipe. If you're able to figure out what's going on, I am perfectly willing to include it, but I'm not planning on putting any energy into fixing this. So that might sound a little harsh, but it's where I'm at right now. So, oh, good. He's still on the same page. Beautiful. Right. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to close this. I'm going to close this. And I'm going to close this. We're in a closing mode, so close all of these now. Okay, so that was Gitter, that was Microsoft Teams, and that was Twitter. Those are the three ones that are used. So the issue in question was 353. So GH353, change wording of default notification messages. Change wording of notification messages to make it clear. I agree, Pascal. I don't think it's an issue necessarily with Cake.Recipe. I think it's the tool, yes, to make it clear that NuGet package might not yet exist. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and commit that, and let's go ahead and git push upstream and git push origin. So those of you who are paying attention, by the way, you'll notice that I haven't had a VM reboot during this stream, and we are over an hour in. So it should tell you that I've got a new VM and I no longer have an expired license. So I've rebuilt this VM today, and I've also done some of the outstanding items that were needing to be done, such as getting PoshGit up and running so that I've got information about my branches in my PowerShell command line now. So all good things. So if we refresh this, we should have a commit associated with it, and we can go ahead and close that off. So close that off, and that should mean that we have one thing left, which is to fix the integration tests. So let's have a look, and I'm assuming that this is still causing the problem that is currently having today. So let's see what's going on, shall we? Let's try running it again. So let me find the integration tests. Well, that's in the test.cake, which is at the root, which is in here. So the entry point for this thing is just the test.cake. So tests, unzip Cake.Recipe, setting up integration tests. Where do we actually currently run the integration test for Cake.Recipe? Where do we run them? Do we only run them locally, or do we actually run them as part of our CIs? I don't think we do as part of our CI, because otherwise it would have been done when we do it locally. Interesting. It's been a while since I've looked at this side of things. Maurice is saying, if I remember correctly, Maurice, I think there maybe already is one. Am I right in saying that, Pascal? I remember reading, I think, that there was one. I could be wrong. So let's go here. Let's see what happens when we do a build.sh with test.cake. Let's see what happens. Thought that was going to happen. So, oh, what has Pascal found here? Should be fixed in 18.3. So what version are we currently on? Tools.cake is on No. I beg to disagree. If you're saying that that build that you linked to is... Yeah, but the indication on here was that the fixed version was 2018.3. So it's either not the same issue or it's incorrect, the version numbers. This... What are you saying, Pascal? Have I only just... Is it only recently been updated? Oh, it was. So when was that? That was 12 days ago. And the build that you linked to was how many days ago? Where did the link that you... This one here. Copy. This one was 9 hours ago. So when did you last clear the cache of this thing? Or rather, which version of Cake.Recipe are you using? Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. 4.8.9. And I said the most recent version was 4.9.0. It's unlikely that that one change was... When was that commit done? That was... It's unlikely it was just that one commit. No, you should have had it. Yeah, you should have had that change already. So I'm going to call that as not fixed. Yeah, it's way down here. So, no, you would have had that already within that build. So it's broken. Still broken. Okay. Right. Why is this not doing what I want it to do, which is to run the integration tests? I'm doing something wrong, and I cannot think what it is, because that didn't run the test that I wanted it to run. It's coming up with an error. More than one build script specified. This is the old chestnut where the build.ps1 file doesn't account for the arguments correctly. So let's blow it away. Yes. And look at the comment. Oh, interesting. Sorry, I never spotted that. Copy to clipboard. Coop Finder is indeed using 2018.2. So why diddly why is it not coming through? And Pascal, I don't think it can be cached, because if you look up here, then Cake version or Cake.Recipe actually outputs the version of Cake.Recipe it used as part of the build. So that is 489, which is only one away from the most recent version. So would you be able to run it locally and try it? I think that's something definitely to be done. Yes. And I will try and figure out why this isn't doing what I want to do. So let's change this again to recipe.cake. And then let's see if we can have it do this. That's still not doing what I wanted to do. I'm doing something wrong. Hi, Real Trumpy. Nice of you to join us. Oh, hold on. Am I using the wrong? This is PowerShell after all. Let's change that. Oh, that looks better. Right. So now it's doing cake.gulp. It's cloning a bunch of stuff. And it's cloning it into Cake.Recipe tests. Well, that's interesting. Real Trumpy is now hosting me. Thank you very much. My laptop, where I've everything set up, was just broken, but can try later and report the issue. That would be good, Pascal. Thank you. So, what we're looking at here is Cake.gulp tools. Right, so the issue persists. So here, Cake.Recipe is being extracted into the tools folder called Cake.Recipe, but it's still going out and finding the most recent version, which is 490, which is then being used as part of the integration tests. So this is something we definitely need to fix. Now, the question becomes how. So let's wait and see what this finishes with, because it does this for which add-ins folder? This one here. Lots of things. Is that what you want to see, Sean? I take it that pinning the version in the packages.config file does not resolve this. Unfortunately, no. So what we're trying to do here is, as part of the building of Cake.Recipe, or rather, in terms of testing Cake.Recipe, we have a suite of integration tests, and those integration tests run off and download or clone 3 known add-ins that use Cake.Recipe. And then what the integration test then does is it takes the output of the build of Cake.Recipe and it copies it into this folder here, Cake.Recipe. And then the integration test runs the build of that add-in project. Now, unfortunately, because of the way that the in-process NuGet client works, it also resolves the current hosted version of Cake.Recipe, and it uses that one rather than the named one here. Now, the only way that I could see to get rid of, to prevent that from happening, would be to somehow know what this number was going to be, to then be able to put this into the right place, essentially replacing these contents into here so that it would work. What I don't know is how to do that. Now, the suggestion that Martin made in the issue that's associated with this, so we go back up here to the issues, then Martin was suggesting that we should resolve the... Ooh, that might have to be the way of doing it. So I just had a thought there. So right now, the reason that this happens the way it happens is because if we go to cake.gulp, which is up here, let's go up here to cake.gulp. If we go up here to cake.gulp and look at its setup.cake, then it's because of this. So what the thought process I just had was, why not, before executing the build, change this line. So read this line in, change it to source it from a new location, and then have the build run. And I'm wondering whether that's going to work. I'm wondering if that's going to work. Because this NuGet preprocessor directive can, or rather the NuGet section of this preprocessor directive can take a file location. So in theory, if we were to place the nupkeg into a file location, then we could resolve Cake.Recipe from there. But it would mean manipulating the setup.cake file. So, can anybody see any potential issues with doing that? Or does that make sense? And actually, what was the output of that? So where do we get to in this build process? So cake.http is failing some unit tests by the look of it, but that's not necessarily a problem with this integration test. It's maybe a problem with actual cake.http. Kim's saying, why not get the expected version from git version? Then on line 100 of the test script, append the version to the folder name before copying. So, if I've understood you correctly, Kim, if we go here to line 100, then append the version number to here. And that's fine. But what happens when we do what I've said? So one of the whole points of doing this is that I want to get away from using myget. I want to get to a point where I'm using NuGet.org and version 1.0.0. So if I do what you're suggesting there, which is not a bad idea, to preemptively know what the release version is so it matches what this will be, I don't want to use this. I want to use a non-pinned version of Cake.Recipe and source it from a different location, which I think means we have to replace this line. We have to replace this line with where we want the NuGet package to come from, I think. Does that make sense? It does in my head, but I don't. I'm maybe off on a tangent. So while I mull that over, I will wait for people to come back to me. Because in theory, I could search for something that's known to always be the case, which is this section of the line, and then replace this line with something else. No problem, Maurice. Thank you for joining. Talk to you later. That's not good, Kim. So what I was suggesting, just as a quick recap, is that your suggestion will work if the load preprocessor directive is like this. But I want to move away from this. I want to move to a pinned version of Cake.Recipe. So the current version is not going to matter because it may be a pinned version. So I think I'm going to want to replace this line completely in each of the projects that we use as a integration test, and then source it from a new file location. And Sean is then suggesting it would be nice to have an intercept mechanism for load. Yes, it would. It certainly in these integration test scenarios, something like an intercept method would make sense, yes. I'm just trying to think through how that would look. But I think I have a potential solution. So we would want to look at the setup.cake file. We'd want to find the line that contains package equals cake.recipe, because it's not guaranteed to be the first one. There's a strong chance that it's the first one, but there's no guarantee for it to be the first one. So we need to find the line that has cake.recipe in it, and then replace it with a load of NuGet from a file location. And that file location will be the build output folder. So if we go to here and organizations, cake.contrib, cake.recipe, build artifacts, packages, NuGet, then I want to source it from here. Now in this scenario, it's the same one because I haven't made any changes and the pre-release is getting me the same version. So that's why it was giving me that version number. And that's fine. But I want to take that nutkeg and put it as the source on there. So this is where I want it to come from. So where's my integration tests? What does it actually do? So it's setting up the repositories. So we know build script name. So we know what those things are. Package is... Well, that's good, Pascal. Thank you for following up with that. So yeah, think we're okay to close that issue then, like we did. I think I left it open, did I? I can't remember if I closed it or whether I just removed it from the milestone. But if you could follow up with that, that'd be great. So what's recipe path here? Recipe path is that folder. So recipe path is the package. So that's the package. So what is package currently being used for? Package name. So Sean is saying in future, if you had globbing, you could just load the Cake.Recipe source rather than dealing with the package. Yes, we could, but it would still mean manipulating the load preprocessor directive in each of the packages. So the work to manipulate that, I think, is the same in both cases. Write a temporary file with the needed loading right before test.cake is ran in recipe.cake. Write a temporary file with the needed loading right before test.cake is ran in Cake.Recipe. I would still need to change it though in each of the recipe files for each of the integration tests though, right? Or have I misunderstood what you're saying there, Kim? I'm fairly sure I'm still going to need to manipulate it in those ones. So unzipping NuGet to there, to there. So for each repo, and test repos, blah, 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 blah. We clone some stuff, we unzip. Leave so, but then you have a common file that can be loaded to handle that perhaps. Is the loader subject to IOC, so could be done with a module? It's an interesting idea, Sean. The way that the preprocessor directives work, they are modules. So the NuGet module, the NuGet preprocessor is a module in its own right. It's how it's implemented within Cake proper. It's just that it's not an external module. Whether we could overwrite that, whether that would make sense, yeah. That would be one way of doing it. That would be out with the realm of what I was hoping to achieve this evening and to get a stable release out. But it's certainly something to think about. So for now, what I think I'm going to do is I am going to remove some stuff from this so I can test it without having to wait for a bunch of stuff to complete. So let's change that. And rather than... So the clone needs to happen. And then in this unzip one, I think is where we want to do some stuff, which is different to what's here just now. So let's just abuse this task to then see what we can do. So we know the test repo is up here. It has a build script name. So we can what are we going to do? What are we going to do? This is anyone's opportunity to step in and just give me the answer. Otherwise, I'll mull it over for a bit and see what happens. I'm even trying to think where I've done things like this in other Cake scripts. I know I've used, when I've needed to manipulate files as part of my build before, I've used an add-in called Magic Chunks. Magic Chunks is a very nice little library, utility library for doing replacements of JSON files and XML files, because it allows you to provide basically an XPath to the exact attribute that you want to change, and then you just give it a value and it goes off and does it. Now, obviously, that won't work here because, well, this is a cake file. It's not a structured file. So that's not really going to work in this context. Yes, that is exactly what we're trying to do just now. We're trying to fix the integration tests. If you have an idea for that, then feel free. Let's just see if this is doing what I think it wanted to do. So it's recloning, and then it's finishing. Good. So that reclone has got a fresh clone of the 3, and nothing in the tools folder because it hasn't resolved, hasn't ran it. And this thing here will have, that probably won't let me open that yet because, well, reasons. That file won't be manipulated yet, or won't, that file will still have the original contents, which is what we want to change. So here, let me just write down my thought process. Here we want to search setup.cake for package equals cake.recipe. I'm actually just writing this down here. So currently the integration tests are broken in the sense that we are attempting to use the latest and greatest version of Cake.Recipe to do the build process for the 3 integration repositories that we want to run. Now, previously that worked because of the way NuGet resolved, or because of the way that we used to resolve tools and things. We didn't include the version number in the folder within the tools folder. So depending on how long you've used Cake, you'll historically, if we go and have a look at, let's bring this one up. Organizations, contrib, recipe, tools, add-ins, right? So Cake nowadays appends the version number of the add-in or the tool or the module to the folder name so that it knows which version it is. previous versions of Cake, that wasn't the case because we use NuGet to do the resolving directly. So it just resolved the Cake.code as an example. And that caused problems in terms of pinning to specific versions. Now, the integration tests in Cake.Recipe are kind of based on the old way of doing things. So when it extracts itself, it just extracts it to a Cake.Recipe folder. The problem with that then is that when we actually run the thing that we're trying to build, it still reaches out and resolves the specific version that it's told to as part of its own Cake.Recipe instance. So we want to provide a way to override that. So as Sean's pointing out there in the chat room, we want to search and replace the Cake scripts to replace the load preprocessor directive with resolving to a specific location. So rather than having, let's go back to here. So rather than having this as an example, i.e. change this to, and then we want to do load NuGet, and then I think what we want to be able to do is then it's the file path that we already have in here, which is, what's it called? Recipe path. So this is obviously just pseudocode, but you get the meaning. Recipe path to then be package equals Cake.Recipe. And we would probably want to include pre-release on there as well. Otherwise, it's potential it might not find it. So we want to look inside the file for a line that looks like that, and then replace it with a line that looks like this, save it, and then run the integration tests. And if all of that works, then we should be able to know that the integration tests work or not. Now, in the test that we just did, the integration tests, I think, didn't necessarily work very well because the builds on those 3 selected repositories are broken just now. But that's a different issue. But they're still not testing what we want to test, which is what we're trying to fix. Later we can figure out why the tests themselves are not working. So yeah, integration tests failed, but that's not a failing of what it's not even at the point of testing what we wanted to test yet, is what I'm getting at. So, this is where I need to put, I think, a cap on and stop talking for a little bit. So, if we have a look at where I'm immediately thinking about going is up to Cake.FileHelpers, is where I'm immediately thinking about going. Okay, so Gim's just taking my thought out of my head and giving me the exact link, I think. Replace regex in files. So, blah, blah, blah. It takes a globber pattern, a regular expression to find, and then the replacement text. Yep, means writing a regex, but I can do that. So when I reach into regex, I normally regex online tester is this one is what I normally use. So let's take this out and let's get the regex right to start with. So this is the thing that we want to test for. And the regex in question is going to be .star and then package equals Cake.Recipe. Now that's my basic regex. Because why not? Yes. This is why I don't write regex. So Kim is suggesting something a little bit more specific, which is is it because of those at the start and end? Yes, it is. So I like the fact that it's got load at the start. That doesn't account for potential white space at the start. I know you were trying to do that with the hat and the $sign. So that's potentially something that we can include. I think I want to be a little bit more specific in here and say package equals, because it pretty much has to have that in it. So there's the potential for optional white space, which is that this? No, how do I put white space in again? We'll come back to that. Okay, so we've got a regex for something that we want to replace, and we know what we want to replace. So if we go back to here and say replace regex in files, is what we want to do. So we're going to go here, and we're going to use this guy, but this one wants to have a add-in. Oh, okay, we can do that. Cake.file helpers. Oh, in fact, let's just come off of this. Let's do cake. Oh no, so what I want to do is this one. Cake add-in file helpers. Sure, and sure. Why did that not work? Oh, because it's not saved. Oh, that's a failure of the that's annoying. It did add it. I've actually fixed this bug in. I've actually fixed this in the Visual Cake add-in for Visual Studio Code. How can I resolve this? Please compare your version with the one on disk. Yeah. Fine. Go away. How do I... Don't really want to do that, but let's see where we get to. Okay, fine. Let's put it back in again. Okay. And then this obviously wants... There must be a newer version of Cake.Git because it was complaining about that during the build. So let's put that in as well. Cake.Git. Git 19.0. Sure. Okay. So we've got cake.file helpers, and then down here we were going to be doing something along the lines of this. My machine decides to work with me. which is here. So then this thing wanted a globber pattern. The globber pattern to match files to replace text in. So that for us is the repo name. So as part of this, there was a build script name. So this is going to be relative to the this is going to be relative to what? Oh, it's here, look. Let's just borrow this. Copy. Then it wants the regex, which we had from over here. Copy. And then it wanted what to replace it with. And what we said was that we want it to be this or something like this. You know what? Let's just see if it works. Bob. Okay. Do we think this is going to work? Let's find out, shall we? And then we need to think about drawing this to a close. Oh, for goodness sake. 94. I forgot a closing bracket somewhere. Oh, look at that. I need to add in the bakery into this. Oh, for goodness sake. So that's giving me a file path, but it expects a string. So a file path, I can never remember that off the top of my head. I should know these things. File path has a property on it. Is it just path? Full path. Look at that. Dot full path. Let's see. Ooh, did something. Did something. See what it did, shall we? See tests, repos, gulp. Oh, can't copy paste that to there. That would be interesting. Let's put this into here. Oh, come on. See tests, repos, gulp. Gasp! Look at that. We replace Bob. Or we put Bob in there. That's great. Okay. So that worked slightly better. I wasn't expecting that to work. I'll be honest. I was expecting that to not work the first time. Let's make this a little bit clearer what we're trying to do here. So it's not Bob. We want to take this, copy, and put it into here. And we're going to put that in quotes. We're going to put that in quotes. Now this thing here is, let's see if we're going to do it this way. Oh, there's a new regex coming out here. Format this with this, and that is going to be, what did I say it was? Recipe. recipe path. Oh, I see what you've done there, Sean. Yes, we should probably do that for the short notation of the load preprocessor directive as well. I still like to have. Is there a reason we're not? That's a second alternative suggestion that doesn't have the package equals Cake.Recipe in it. Is there a reason that we're not including that? Just out of curiosity. To me, it makes more sense to constrain it a little bit more. I know we already are because of the load preprocessor directive, so I'll have to think about that one. So what's this done? Look at that. Look at that. So see, GitHub organizations, Cake contrib, recipe, build artifacts, NuGet. Ooh. Is this a regex off? Is this a battle of the regexes now, is it? Love it. Love it. I'm going to leave the regex people to doing their thing. I'm going to see if this now does what I think it wants to do. And I'm going to uncomment these lines here. No, not those lines there. I'm going to uncomment these lines to let it execute the script. Let's see what it does this time. Dun dun dun. So cloning into cake.gulp. And then, ooh, look at that. It's got that 49490 in there. And I think that has been resolved from the local directory as opposed to the Tinternets. I think that just worked. How can I prove that to myself so that it worked? I guess in theory I could do a commit and it should git version will bump the version number and we would get a 491 if it all worked. Does that sound right? So let's let that run, I guess. What version, what issue are we working on? That is 306. So let's see what changes we've got here. Oh, don't like that. Oh, it's picked up on those changes there. That's fine. So in here, actually, this is a change I do want, and this is just a maintenance release. So maint updated, update to latest PS bootstrapper. That change I want right now. So I can do a commit there. By the way, to answer your question regarding why not using package in the reject, basically it is needed and it's unlikely that it will match any other load. See, that was so my concern wasn't necessarily for matching other load preprocessor directives, it was matching anything that's got Cake.Recipe. But because we've now got load, in my original version, I just had .star Cake.Recipe or .star package equals Cake.Recipe. But now that we've put the load preprocessor in the front, I think I'm more inclined to not. Yeah, it's not necessary to have the package equals there. No need to make it longer than needed. So I'm going to go ahead and commit that. And that should give me a 491 rather than 490. So let's, you know what, I'm going to kill this if I can. Let's just kill it. So over here, we come out of this and run that again. What happens? there's an error. It's because it's still running Cake in the background. But it's still running because it didn't actually. Yeah, it's doing stuff. Didn't actually kill it, did it? See if we can delete it here. No, it's still doing stuff. Have I got Lock Hunter installed here? No, I don't. That's unfortunate. That doesn't look good. Maybe just should have let it do its stuff. Let's kill this completely. Oh, there we go. Right. So now we CD back into there. CD into C. GitHub. Organizations. Cake contrib. Cake.Recipe. If we do a build.sh with our target, script, which was test.cake. Let's see what it does this time. So into repos, into gulp, into tools, it's still got 490 in it. Why is it still got 490 in it when we should have been changing that? Because, let's check to see what's in that folder. Oh, hold on. Because I haven't done integration test. Should have done the build, or should it? Let me think about that a little bit. So in GitHub, organizations, Cake contrib, Cake.Recipe, build artifacts, packages, it's still got 490 in there. So the integration tests doesn't currently do the build. We should probably fix that as well. One test failed because of missing SDK, just to have it present. So yeah, I think I mentioned that. Welcome back, Matthias. Currently, I think the builds of some of our test projects are failing out with anything to do with Cake.Recipe. I think there are other things going on. So I think we need to fix those. But this is really just about getting the integration test to test with what we think is actually testing. Okay. So no, we've spoken about that. Matthias, we can't just replace it with a version number because potentially the version number is out with it's not a pre-release version. It's pinned to a specific version. So we want to do resolve the Cake.Recipe package irrelevant of the version number. I don't think it's got anything to do with it. I don't think we want to go down that route because you're meant to run it from recipe cake, I think. Oh, are we? Oh, hold on. Have I been running this incorrectly? That's entirely possible. Oh, look at that. Okay then. Let's run this puppy. We can definitely do that. I see. Okay, so that would. Okay, so let's let this finish properly, and then let's run it from recipe.cake or setup.cake, whichever one it is, and see what happens. Can I just kill it again? Just kill it again. It's taking too long. Is HTTP the last one? No, there's Twitter as well. Let's just we'll give it a minute, and we'll let it finish out. So, Matthias, just to bring you up to speed with where we are, we've now got, rather than unzipping Cake.Recipe into a folder, we are attempting to directly replace the load preprocessor directive with a locally resolving new preprocessor directive, and extracting the files just in the normal way with that new load preprocessor directive. And if that works, which I think it is, or it would, but we hadn't built 491, so we can't prove that we're getting the right version number at the minute. So I want to, you know what, I'm gonna kill this again. Right. I don't want to wait. So what you're suggesting is still trying to do stuff. Let's kill it again. Oh, it doesn't like it very much. Let's do cd into GitHub again, organizations, Cake.Contrib, Cake.Recipe. And what Kim's saying is, if we do this with, I thought I had it in my clipboard. This one. Then it will build it, and then it will run the integration tests. So what we'll get in our build artifacts, he says, will be add. Should have read that message before I hit go, but it's all good. So there's 491. So the version number has incremented. So now in here, in our tools, we should have 491. Ha! Yes. Beautiful. Love it when a plan comes together. So now those integration tests are running with the locally compiled or locally created nupkeg. So this integration test is now testing with our actual build. So I think that's it done. That's the outstanding thing that was holding up the Cake.Recipe release. So the integration tests themselves are currently failing, but that's an upstream issue just now, I think. So I've asked this question again. I've asked this question already, but I'm going to ask it again, assuming that no one else has added any other issues into the milestone. We should still just have one in here. We do. Are there any other known high priority or big problems that would prevent a release of Cake.Recipe tomorrow? Because it won't be now, because I'm going to go to my bed soon. Anything else that would stop me from hitting the go button? Now is the opportunity to speak or type, because if I don't hear anything, I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna release a 1.0.0 release of Cake.Recipe, which would then allow me and or others who are updating Cake add-ins to 33, the 33 release of Cake, to remove the usage of myget and instead use the official release from the NuGet feed. And then once we've kind of worked through all of the add-ins that are being used by Cake.Recipe itself and updated them to 0.33, we can start the process of fixing Cake.Recipe to use 0.33 to then start using things like the globber pattern that we spoke about and improve how that works. And we can start that process of going through and getting everything updated. Would love to have the coverlet support added, but think that will take me quite a bit of time to implement. I would like that too, because that seems to be the way that things are going from a coverage standpoint for your tests, for our tests. I would like to see that as well. But I think you're right. I think that's maybe something for the next release. I mean, that could be a 1.1 release, and we could do that before breaking anything. If we know we're going to start breaking things, then we can do that, change the coverlet stuff and get that out at 1.1, so people could immediately start using that without breaking anything. We could do it that way. So I don't think there's anything to worry about necessarily from there. If you wanted to work on that, Kim, we could certainly... Yes, you mentioned that. So Kim's mentioning in the chat room there that there are 2 ways to execute coverlet, which he's spoken to me about previously in a GitHub issue. So depending on how that gets implemented in Cake.Recipe, that might take a little bit. But like I say, nothing to stop us doing that as a separate scope of work that we could pull into a 1.1 whilst breaking things towards the 2.0 release. So yeah, if there's nothing else, I will tidy this up. There's a question there from Matthias. Should recipe pin to a Cake version and fail if unsupported? So maybe. So what you're saying there is if someone's using Cake.Recipe and they are trying to execute a build with a version of Cake that is higher than the supported version, it should fail. Have I understood you correctly there? It's deathly silence. I think I've understood them correctly there, but I'm waiting for confirmation. Yep, or not the same. I'd say yes to that. I think it's fair. So it's sort of implied, but you have to kind of go looking for it. So Cake.Recipe at the minute, the build of Cake.Recipe in my mind pins to the version of Cake that it's expected to run with. Is how I think about it. So this is 32.1 to build Cake.Recipe. So it's kind of an unwritten rule that is what your project should build with as well, that's using Cake.Recipe. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule, but we could put a check in, I guess. Would it be a hard fail or would it be a warning? Because some people don't like hard fails because they might know better. So, can we get that verse string in uspec maybe to start with? Can we get that version string in uspec maybe to start with? I'm not sure if I follow what you mean, and I don't know how to pronounce your handle. So, I don't know how to direct the question to you, but yeah. So what Matthias is saying is the version of Cake is available as a parameter within Cake.Recipe itself. It's already has that information because we output that as part of our build. So if we go and have a look at here, we say as part of the setup, I think, is it? Yeah, we have information, building version, blah, 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 with version of Cake. So what you're saying in there as part of the setup is that if the Cake version is not equal to insert hard-coded version here, fail the build. Timing with one hand and eating. I hope it's something tasty. New spec equals new get package description. Oh, I see what you're saying. There's no reason we couldn't do that, but I think it would be as simple to put in a hard fail if directly into here. We could basically say if build parameters dot version dot cake version not equal to what's that? Is that a string? I don't know. Let's just put it in 0.32.1 throw new exception. Boom. Oh yeah, of course we could. But for now, I mean that. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, this is essentially what we're talking about, right? This is a hard stop of a Cake.Recipe build execution if it's the parent project isn't using the known good version of Cake. Is that what we're saying? So obviously this would be tidied up a little bit, but this is what we're getting at, right? But knowing upfront that upgrading to this recipe will require minimum Cake version is better example. Okay, yeah, I that's a valid point. So in here in the description, so blah blah blah. And here we're saying, note, it is expected that any build using Cake.Recipe is built using Cake 0.32.1. As an example, that could be expanded on more, but essentially that's what you're. So, like I say, I'm just trying to get my ducks in a row before I sign off for the evening. So, add a required Cake version also to GitHub release description. Okay, so that's okay. So we're all chiming in. So you're all starting to chime in with things after when I'm away to go home. So it's a little bit late in the day, people. But so have I got everything in a row here then? So let's go back. So let's create a new issue so I don't forget about it. Include minimum or include recommended version of Cake in release notes. So this is going to be documentation, this is going to be a milestone, and I'll take it. Okay, so we've got include it in the release notes. We've got an entry in the description for the NuGet package that gets pushed to NuGet.org. We've got a hard stop in the build.cake file if it doesn't match that, and this could obviously be a parameter. Make this a const somewhere. Okay, so I need to fix that. So this is going to be a to-do. So we've got that hard stop now. We've got the description updated, and we've got the release notes. It's only 22 in the Well, it is. Yes. I've been up since 5:30 this morning. What time did you get up, Kim? Hey? Is that everything? Any other suggestions? Oh, what? I was convinced I was going to be earlier than you. Dang it. That's just crazy. Okay, so we've either removed or closed the issues that were extending on the on the milestone. We've switched milestone from 030 to 100. We have fixed the integration tests. We have... Oh, there's some other things I need to do as well. Let's add some of these things. New issue. Update. New spec. Metadata for license and repository. Let's do this. Improvement. Milestone in there, so I don't forget about that as well. The icon URL looked like it was already using JS Deliver, which it is. Okay, so assuming that I get all those things done, I get those issues closed off, I'm going to push out a 1.0.0 release of Cake.Recipe. And Matthias is then suggesting that you could always switch tests to projects that compile. Or we could go and fix those projects because they are probably ones that need to be updated. So I think I'm right in saying that, well, so Cake.Twitter builds, because that's one of my projects. I think I'm right in saying that Cake.Gulp is in the process of being updated, and Pascal was going to be doing that one. And Cake.HTTP, it'll come out in the wash, I think, as we update that to 0.33. With the new version of Cake.Recipe, I think the integration test will then flow through. So I think I would prefer to keep the ones that are in here and just fix them as a first port of call. Comment out the failing unit. That's not how we're going to fix it. No, Matthias, that is the wrong approach, and we're not doing it. I think we can tidy it. I don't think we're using this package anymore, so we could probably get rid of that as well. Let's put another to-do in here. To-do. Don't think we are using this anymore. My typing is horrendous. Right, so this is going to be the... What issue was this? Integration test 306. So this is going to be GH 306. Let's do this. Git checkout -b feature GH 306 from develop, and then put message in here. Blah blah. Let's just add all of these and commit it, and then git push origin, and then paste that in there so that it's not on this computer anymore. Okay, so that's my plan. Anything else from anyone else before I say that's going to be an end to the stream? Must be. I am a little bit. Anything else from anyone else before I close the stream? I've got no words, Matthias. I think we're in a good position to get this out this week. And then from there, start moving any projects that we're aware of onto the stable release, moving them away from the MyGet feed, and then we can start breaking more stuff. Atique, what's your first name, or is that your first name? And I just don't know how to pronounce it. Am I right in saying that it is yourself that has Atique? Assad. Perfect. Am I right in saying that it is yourself who has raised the issue about recipes becoming first-class citizens in Cake itself? Or have I got a different person? Okay. I haven't forgotten about that issue. I know that no one's responded to it, and I haven't either. The short answer is I don't know. I think part of me thinks it does make sense. How it would be implemented, I'm not quite sure. And I know the rest of the guys haven't commented on that issue yet either. So I've kind of taken a step back from it because I have Cake.Recipe, I have Cake.ym.recipe, I have Cake.vscode.recipe. I have lots of recipes in there. So my immediate thought would be, hell yes, let's make it a first-class citizen. What I don't know is whether there's any good reasons to not do it. So I haven't provided any input into that issue just yet, because I was hoping to get some feedback from the rest of the team before I go all gung-ho and just make something happen. So short answer is, don't know yet, but I also haven't forgotten about it. I saw you bump the issue. So definitely feel free to do that. Just know that we're not completely ignoring it, even though we kind of have for the last few weeks that you've had it open. We will get back to it. Yeah. It's definitely something we need to think about, I think. Cake.Recipe can be a little heavy, hence I made my own that focus on just... Absolutely. I mean, there's Cake.Recipe started out as something that tried to be everything to everyone. That's maybe not going to be the case, and again, that's why I wanted to get to a stable release so that we can start to break things, knowing that we're getting it to a known point. I mean, Cake.Recipe tries to handle every single unit testing framework that ever existed. It tries to do various things, and that's why we've got the whole concept of require add-in and require tool, so it's not downloading everything every time. That's kind of the things that we can be refactored out, I think, once we collectively have decided on things that we want to support. But yeah, the concept of recipes is something that's very personal to individuals in organizations and teams and that sort of stuff. So but the good thing is that the concept in general makes a lot of sense. The whole reusability, maintainability, and repeatability shines through with something like Cake.Recipe in whatever incarnation that you have. And like I say, I could have added the VS Code recipe into Cake.Recipe as well, but I mean it wouldn't have made any more sense. So that's why I have a much smaller footprint in the Cake VS Code recipe, which is specifically for building and publishing VS Code extensions. So we need to ship 34 first or is that in response to the whole question about recipe as first-class citizens? Is that what that is, Matthias? Perfect. But no, I mean, Cake.Recipe as it currently stands, I think may morph into something that's maybe specifically for Cake Addins, because that's where it's predominantly used. And if we can make it a little bit lighter in that regard, I think that would help. And like I say, I'm not saying that every Cake add-in has to be built with Cake.Recipe, but certainly the ones that are in the Cake Contrib organization, I still feel it makes a lot of sense to have some commonality on how those add-ins are built, so that the whole concept of accepting a PR into an add-in that's in Cake Contrib organization becomes more about the code changes as opposed to the build process, and having to think about how do I get this one released or how do I get this one packaged up. If we can remove that question, it becomes a lot easier to help maintain those add-ins going forward. And that's kind of where I'm hoping to get to with these changes that are going in, so that we can get to a first release to then make some decisions about how we want to go going forward. And that's a good point. So yes, Cake.Recipe has started out in 2016, if not before .NET Core was really a thing. So it has evolved from handling MS builds to .NET builds to handling both to, it's one of these that will grow, or has grown organically, and probably will continue to do so as well. So it's a good point there by Matthias. Okay, I'm done. I think I've got done what I wanted. I've got more done tonight than I thought we were going to get done. So I'm happy with that. I hope that this has been useful. The upcoming stream on Friday will probably be around updating more of my Cake add-ins that I kind of maintain. We only got one done last Friday. It took longer than I thought it was gonna, but that's how things go. So I intend to probably do another short stream on Friday lunchtime, which is updating another of my add-ins, and hopefully that will be done with the new shiny released version of Cake.Recipe. So if you are free on Friday lunchtime, feel free to join that. And I haven't really got a plan for next Monday's stream yet. It might be finishing off the Cake website infrastructure that myself and Matthias started doing last week. That will really depend on Matthias's availability. So I will follow up with him on that this week. If not, I'm sure there will be plenty of other things that we can talk about. For now, I'm going to sign off. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. And I will talk to you all another day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.